Nobody in human history has ever changed their biological gender from male to female or female to male. It's never happened, not going to happen, it can't. All this happens in the womb at conception.
Hey, I'm here with Walt Heyer, and man, you are in for a treat. Incredible story of just God's redemption and grace. And before I get into any of that, thank you, Walt, for being with us.
Hey, my
on
pleasure.
our My Faith Votes.
You bet.
Tell us your story. Tell our audience who is Walt Heyer and what's happened in your life.
Well, yeah.
We probably don't have time for all of it.
No. Well, we'll just say it started in 1944 when my grandmother started cross-dressing me. And she made me a purple chiffon dress. She was my babysitter when my parents would take off. And that planted the seed that there was something wrong with me as a boy. Man, Grandma just effused over me in my purple dress that she made for me, and this word affirmed and so forth. And now, looking back at 83 years old, I realized what Grandma was doing when cross-dressing me was emotional and psychological child abuse. It's child abuse.
Yeah.
It's not just cross-dressing somebody. Your brain is not fully developed until 25 to 30.
Right.
And we know now that adverse childhood experience, they call them ACEs, when occurred before you're 18 or 19 years old, actually alters the brain at the level of where your identity is being formed. That's what happens when you cross-dress a kid.
Yeah.
You're actually changing their view of their own identity, which is abuse. It's child abuse.
Yeah.
And so that led me to, by 13 years old, but this was before they even had any words, right? At 13, there was no words like transgender and all that stuff. I just started identifying as Crystal West quietly, kind of in the closet kind of thing. And because I was trying to deal with what happened in my childhood, because what happened with the dress led to my dad physically abusing me, trying to shape me into being a hard guy, right? And I'm just a little kid. And then my dad's adopted brother, Uncle Fred, started sexually molesting me because of the purple dress. So you see, the purple dress started not just the emotional and psychological abuse, but it resulted in my dad physically abusing me with a hardwood floor plank to try to make me a man.
Wow.
And then my uncle decided, because I was wearing a dress, that I was fair game to be sexually molested. All this before I'm 9. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not a great way to start life.
No.
And that's why my testimony about this is important. Parents, don't cross-dress your kid because it's harmful.
Yeah.
Period.
And the culture around us is like, oh, it's harmless, it's just a dress. I've heard that before. It's just a dress. Like, what are you trying to say? But you're saying that no, this is child abuse.
It is absolutely institutionalized child abuse that parents are committing on their children. Schools are doing it to kids. The government is involved in this.
Of course.
On many levels.
So it starts at childhood. When did that transition, let's define transgenderism first.
Yeah, transgenderism is a word, right?
Yeah.
That was invented by people who wanted to advance this idea of hormones and surgery for homosexuals.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was a act of pedophilia by pedophilias, people who were into pedophilia. They were the ones who believed that it was good for adult men to have sex with young boys. So they would. This was where it got its basis.
Yeah.
And so, the fact of the matter is, I was never homosexual.
Yeah.
90% of the people I work with aren't homosexual. They're people who I was sexually abused by somebody who was messed up. I was physically. So if you look back at where it comes from, you define transsexualism or transgenderism, whatever you want to call it, is people will identify as being transgender,
right?
But nobody is transgender
because you cannot transition your gender,
right? So the word transition is to make you and everybody believe that someone went from one gender to the other. You can say that you transition, but you never have. There's nobody in human history has ever changed their biological gender from male to female or female to male. It's never happened, not going to happen, it can't. All this happens in the womb at conception. Sorry, it doesn't happen when you're born and get slapped on the butt. So we're just realistic here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. When did that, like in your adult life, what was that process like when you started that?
Yeah, well, see, once Grandma did the dress, once I was physically abused and sexually abused, the process was going. What I needed at that moment was a trauma therapist, a child trauma therapist, to take me out of the environment and help me with the trauma. That's trauma, suffered trauma. This is bad stuff, trauma.
Yeah.
And so I was dealing all the way the rest of my life through the whole process, cross-dressing in my teens, identifying as Crystal West. All this was part of trauma. And so I got married and told my wife at the time, I'm 21 years old, my father just passed away. That was another devastating thing. I was caring for my father when he was going through cancer. Watching him die totally destroyed me. And so I got married and I had 2 children. I had a successful career, but I'd never dealt with being physically, sexually, and emotionally abused.
Yeah.
The childhood is key here.
Yeah, it is.
And so, you know, there isn't, when I went through this, nobody said to me, hey, Walt, you know, you had childhood issues, you need a trauma therapist.
Yeah.
And that this cross-dressing is a result of being sexually abused, emotionally and physically and psychologically abused. So when you stack those things up and you go, man, that's a lot to go through for a kid, right? So what you try to do as a young person is try to figure out how to deal with it.
Yeah.
But you don't ever do it right because there's nobody there to help you. Okay, so I go, you know, I got married, I had a job, a successful career, but I was struggling. I started doing drugs and alcohol because I'm still trying to deal in the best way I could with my childhood.
Yeah.
And it was affecting everything. Married for 14, 15 years. And I was falling apart, even though I was successful in my business. So I go to the #1 gender therapist, psychologist, PhD, Dr. Paul Walker, who wrote the standards of care that are in right now that they still use. They originally started as the Harry Benjamin International Standards of Care. He was my therapist. Told me you have gender dysphoria in 1981. You need hormones and surgery to resolve these issues. Now, there's no Walt Heyer out there at this time going, hey, the bridge is out, don't do this. You need a trauma therapist. You don't need this wacko gender therapist.
Right.
In fact, don't ever go to a gender therapist because they will destroy your life. That's their mission. It's not to help you. They want to cut body parts off, fill you up with things you don't need. So that's important. So what happened was, without any opposition speaking out on it, I said, okay, so I divorced my wife, left my kids. 1983, April, had the surgery, began to identify as Laura Jensen. Now, they changed my birth record to Laura Jensen female, wrote an affidavit saying that I had changed my gender sex, and submitted it to court so I could get all my documents changed. So now I'm running around as identifying as Laura Jensen female. Now, the truth is, I was not a female.
Right.
I'm a man who's been mutilated, running around in a dress appearing to be female. Now, is that by itself should shock anyone's conscience into saying we shouldn't be doing this. This guy was a married man with children who had a career he no longer has. I ended up homeless in a pile of vomit in a Long Beach park trying to figure my life out. That's what that whole thing. I tried to commit suicide afterward because I'd lost everything. My kids wouldn't talk to me. I was done. I was basically broke. Totally broke. I had to borrow a dime to make a phone call. They had phones back in this, because this 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I went into a coffee shop and got some money, dropped it in the phone, called a lady and said, you know, I need help. And she came and got me and took me to somebody's house and put me in their garage.
Wow.
Because I was so filthy and stunk so bad. Put me in the garage, and that's where I started my journey back, was in a garage in Manhattan Beach, California. And so through that process, started going to AA meetings because I knew I was drug addict, alcoholic. I hooked up with a therapist at Fuller Seminary and started going to him, and he thought I was possessed by demons. I wasn't possessed by demons. I was an alcoholic. I had the demon alcohol for sure. And so he tried to get me connected to a church, you know, and so he said, I got a friend that's a pastor, and I went to that church, And he says, hey, you know, I got this Laura Jensen coming, been through some tough times, treat Laura well. And so I go to the church, and I go to church, I sign in the book, Laura Jensen, you know, I'm a newcomer. His wife and other women sit around me, and I listen to him preach. And he comes to my house that Sunday afternoon after I visit the church, and he stands in my front door and says, we don't want your kind in our church. And I said, okay, what kind do you want in your church, you know? So I finally wanted to go to church.
Yeah.
I was trying to find a place I could go where it was safe,
Yeah.
right? So
and most people would have said, well, I just don't belong there, and I'm not going to go find another one.
Yeah.
But that wasn't your story.
No, I know that I'm broken.
Yeah.
See, that's the clue. I hadn't got so delusional that I didn't know that I needed help.
Yeah.
I knew I was confused. I knew this was something had happened. So I went to Jeff Farrar at his church in California, and I said, my first question to him, I said, Jeff, are you going to try to change me back to Walt? Because I didn't know what his head was saying, you know. And he says, no, he says, my job is just to love you.
Mm.
It's God's job to change you, not mine.
Yeah.
So that was like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah.
But then he began to spend time with me, taking me to breakfast and lunch. He had me come into the church. And finally, after about 3 years of being prayed over, and I wrote a prayer letter back then, and because he wanted people to know what I was going through. And I'm still writing the prayer letter to the group today.
Wow.
He still gets the prayer letter 40 years later. It's been a powerful tool. So the point is that finally I started getting recovery from alcohol and drugs, and I started going to therapists and realized that I was suffering from a dissociative disorder that was caused by the physical and sexual abuse.
Yeah.
So that was the bottom line. Nobody had ever said that before. So, and then I started looking at it, and you realize that if you want to study the whole idea of people changing genders, they're dissociating, every single one of them. It's a dissociative disorder at its core, right?
Yeah.
You're dissociating from who you are to try to become somebody you can't become.
Yeah.
So then my journey was to prayer, where the Lord came and redeemed and restored my life in 1990. And I knew at that point, man, I got to talk out about this. There's too many lives being destroyed by this absolute insane nonsense.
Yeah. So the church had a significant role in this.
Powerful.
The one church, we don't want you here.
Right.
Which I'm afraid would be a lot of the responses churches today they give. But what I love about your story so much is the pastor in California. That's a model for all of us of, come on in, you're broken, I've been broken, I'm broken too. Let's experience God's grace together. And that's such a powerful reminder to everyone and how our culture is to view every person. You know, and I love that part of your story. I'm literally like on the edge of my seat listening to everything you're saying. It's so great.
I need to tell you, it's important for everybody here. You're right. It is important for the church, but they struggled with it.
Oh, of course.
And they actually, at one point, the elders had a meeting and said, we really, it's causing too much disruption.
Yes, I've heard you. Share that. Yeah,
and
so
I've
heard you mentioned this before.
They actually each, they had Jeff come to me and say, you can't come to church anymore.
Yeah.
So it happened a second time, right? And I said, so what is it? Well, it's you're struggling. Your struggle is too public, and it's affecting people. And I said, well, it should affect people. It's affecting me. Yeah. Right. And so I said, but I won't come. I'm not pushing myself on you. You know, the Lord's got this. I don't know where He's going to take it, but the Lord's got it. So that the following week they had an elder meeting, and each elder got on the phone and called me and said, we were wrong. You are exactly the person we need in the church. You are the one teaching us how to deal with this. Yeah. And so then I went back, and they began to look at this. They actually had me do a Sunday service, 3 services where I spoke in October of 1989. And Pastor Jeff said, I don't want you doing this anymore because I've never got a standing ovation before.
Oh, that's great. That is great. Let's talk about what you're doing now.
Yeah.
And I want to encourage some parents, because I hear far too often the story of my child is confused.
Yeah.
I hear that more often now than I ever would have imagined I heard. I mean, and just how fast this is going with that idea and that lie from the enemy. One, I want you to share what you're doing now in hopes of encouraging those parents or grandparents watching this that may have that child or someone else who is struggling with that.
Yeah, when parents write me, I want every parent who's listening to us today to realize you don't have a trans kid. There is no such thing as a trans kid.
Yeah.
And I liked what you used, confusion.
Yeah.
They're confused by what they're hearing and what they're seeing. A lot of it's on the internet. A lot of it's from school. A lot of it's from their friends. But don't fall for the idea that you have a trans kid. You don't. You have a kid that's struggling with this social contagion. And I encourage every parent to look up the definition of a social contagion. You'll see what's happening to your child.
Yeah.
And so you need to, every parent needs to understand you need to nurture that child and affirm that child the way God made them. Period.
Yeah.
End of story. Drop the mic. Right? There is no other, I mean, God only made male and female. Yeah. Now, they are trying to destroy your child with this nonsense. That's their objective. And if they can destroy a girl and a boy this early in life, they can destroy a marriage later down the road. They can destroy the cornerstone of the church. This is what this is really about.
Yeah.
The foundation of the church is based on one man, one woman, having children who follow the Lord Jesus Christ.
That's right.
They are trying to destroy that.
Yeah.
That's all this is about.
Yeah.
The word transgenderism is the rocket that they're trying to use to blow up a family.
Yeah.
And they're being successful.
I like how you say that. That's good.
You know, and they're destroying families in the process. If parents realize you do not have a trans kid, you're never going to have a trans kid, don't cross-dress him, don't buy into it, and get firm and get vocal about the fact that if your kid's finding this in school, take them out of school.
Yeah.
I'd rather have an uneducated kid than one destroyed by this absolute insane nonsense.
Wow. I heard that. And now you are, you mentioned this, so I'm not letting the cat out of the bag, but you said earlier you're 83 years old.
Yeah.
And you are the longest living person who has survived this, speaking out on this issue. And you are a voice in the wilderness in this issue. My Faith Votes, we encourage Christians to pray about issues, think about them, and vote accordingly. What's at stake in the next election when it comes to this issue?
Well, we need people who are going to drive a nail in the school system, transitioning kids and turning them into the LGBT activists that they're doing today.
Amen.
So whatever candidate most portrays ending this in our public school systems gets my vote. And we need powerful people. Yeah. I mean, the school systems right now have become the LGBT indoctrination center for destroying kids. And I've worked with children as young as 10 years old where the parents did not know the school was actually telling the kid they could change genders at school and didn't have to tell the parent. Now that kid, and that particular child ended up in psychiatric care, so traumatized by what the school was doing and what was happening at home. And now the child is 13 years old, just had a birthday. I'm still working with him for 3 years. And so we know that given the right information, kids won't do this. But fortunately, we got involved in this one. It was in psychiatric care. When the mom called me, I said, if you can go in there, do a 5150, pull that kid out of there, we're gonna straighten him out.
Wow.
They hustled him out, got him home, got him in an environment where they're not feeding him full of this nonsense. So, you know, public schools are a nasty place. I'd rather have grandma and grandpa doing homeschooling if you're parents and have to work.
Yeah, and so it's more than just a presidential election. It's the school boards, and it's the people you're voting in your school boards, and those elections matter. Walt, I could sit here for like another 2 hours with you. I just love talking to you, and I'm so grateful that you were with us today. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
For all of the work that God is doing through you. It is evidence of the grace of God, and I'm just so encouraged to be with you. Thank you so much, my brother.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My pleasure.